In the vast expanse of the universe, where stars burned like ancient candles and planets floated like forgotten dreams, there existed a kingdom unlike any other. It was ruled by King Zorith, an alien monarch whose power stretched across galaxies. His throne sat atop a shimmering palace made of crystal-like material that pulsed with energy, as though it were alive. The air in his realm crackled with authority, and every being under his dominion bowed to his will without question. Zorith was not just powerful, he was feared. His decisions shaped destinies, and his commands echoed through time itself. Yet, despite his immense strength, there was one thing about which even the mighty king felt powerless: his daughter, Aelira. She was different from everyone else in the royal family. Where others radiated brilliance or wielded extraordinary abilities, she seemed ordinary. Her presence didn't stir awe, nor did she possess talents worthy of mention. In a world where dominance defined worth, Aelira appeared useless, a disappointment to her father and a mystery to those around her. The whispers traveled fast among the courtiers and servants. "Why does she exist?" they murmured behind closed doors. "What purpose could such a weakling serve?" These questions lingered in the halls of the palace, growing louder with each passing day. To them, Aelira's existence was a flaw in the otherwise perfect tapestry of their ruler's legacy. Even her own siblings avoided her, embarrassed by what they saw as a stain on their bloodline. But for all their disdain, no one understood the depth of King Zorith's frustration more than he himself. He had tried countless times to mold her into something greater, pushing her toward disciplines that might awaken some hidden potential. But nothing worked. She failed at combat training, struggled with strategic games, and couldn't grasp the intricacies of diplomacy. Every attempt ended in disappointment, leaving him angrier and more disillusioned. Eventually, he stopped trying altogether, relegating her to the shadows of the palace, far from public view. Aelira grew up isolated, aware of how others perceived her but unable to change their opinions. While her father busied himself ruling over worlds, she wandered the empty corridors of the palace, searching for meaning in a life that seemed devoid of purpose. Though she bore the weight of her inadequacy silently, it gnawed at her heart, carving out a void that nothing could fill. And so, the days turned into years, until one fateful decision would alter the course of both their lives forever. It began as a solution to a problem that had plagued King Zorith for decades: alliances. Despite his vast empire, maintaining loyalty among his subjects required constant reinforcement. Treaties, gifts, and displays of power kept most in line, but there were always factions seeking independence, questioning his rule. One such faction resided on a distant planet called Terra, home to humans who had recently discovered interstellar travel. They were ambitious, resourceful, and increasingly resistant to Zorith's influence. Desperate to secure their allegiance, Zorith devised a plan. He would offer them something valuable, something symbolic enough to bind them to his cause. His gaze fell upon Aelira, standing quietly in the corner of the grand hall during yet another council meeting. Her presence went unnoticed by nearly everyone, save for him. For the first time, however, her insignificance sparked an idea rather than irritation. If he gave her away, married her off to a human leader, it would serve two purposes: strengthen ties with Terra and rid him of the burden she represented. The moment the thought took root, it consumed him. He summoned Commander Kale, his most trusted advisor, to discuss the matter privately. "I have decided," Zorith announced, his voice dripping with finality. "She will be sent to Terra. Let them deal with her." Kale hesitated, glancing toward Aelira before speaking. "My lord, are you certain? She is still your daughter." "She is nothing," Zorith roared, slamming his fist against the armrest of his throne. "Nothing but a reminder of my failure. If she cannot contribute here, then perhaps she can find use elsewhere. Prepare the arrangements." Word spread quickly throughout the palace, reaching Aelira herself. When she learned of her fate, she felt surprisingly little anger. Instead, a strange sense of relief washed over her. Perhaps leaving this place, this gilded cage where she never belonged, would finally grant her freedom. Still, the sting of rejection lingered. She had hoped, deep down, that her father might see her differently someday. Now, she realized that hope had been foolish. On the eve of her departure, Aelira stood alone on the balcony overlooking the capital city. Below, ships zipped through the sky, carrying diplomats, merchants, and warriors to distant corners of the galaxy. Above, stars twinkled like cold eyes watching her every move. She clenched her fists tightly, willing herself not to cry. This wasn't the end, she told herself. It was a beginning, even if it came wrapped in humiliation. When the morning arrived, Aelira boarded the sleek spacecraft assigned to transport her to Terra Prime. As the engines hummed to life, she stole one last glance at the palace, now shrinking into the distance. Somewhere inside, her father watched her leave, unmoved by guilt or regret. For him, she was already forgotten. But for Aelira, the journey ahead promised uncertainty, and maybe, just maybe, redemption. The journey to Terra Prime was long and silent, filled with stretches of darkness punctuated only by the faint glow of distant stars outside the ship's windows. Aelira spent much of the voyage lost in thought, staring out at the endless void while grappling with emotions she couldn't quite name. Fear, yes, but also determination. She didn't know what awaited her on the human planet, but she resolved to face it head-on. Whatever happened next, she vowed to prove that she was more than the sum of her failures. When the ship finally descended onto Terra Prime, Aelira stepped out into a world unlike anything she'd ever known. Gone were the crystalline towers and glowing landscapes of her home. Instead, she found herself surrounded by sprawling cities built of steel and glass, bustling streets teeming with people, and skies crisscrossed by flying machines. The air smelled different too. Earthy, metallic, alive. It was chaotic, overwhelming, and strangely exhilarating. Her arrival drew immediate attention. A delegation of humans, led by a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, greeted her formally. His name was Captain Marcus Darnell, a decorated military officer chosen to represent Terra Prime in negotiations with King Zorath. From the moment he laid eyes on Aelira, his expression betrayed skepticism. Clearly, he had expected someone more regal, more impressive. What he saw instead was a young woman clad in simple robes, her demeanor quiet and unassuming. "I am Captain Darnell," he said curtly, extending his hand. "Welcome to Terra Prime." Aelira nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you for receiving me." Darnell studied her for a moment longer before turning to address his team. "Take her to the embassy. We'll begin discussions tomorrow." With that, he strode away, leaving Aelira in the care of his subordinates. They escorted her to a towering building near the city center, where she was shown to a modest suite. The accommodations were comfortable enough, though they lacked the opulence she'd grown accustomed to back home. Still, she preferred simplicity. It reminded her less of the suffocating expectations she'd left behind. Over the following days, Aelira met with various officials, each eager to assess the value of their newfound alliance. Some treated her politely, others dismissively, but none bothered to hide their curiosity about her origins, or their doubts about her worth. During these meetings, she remained composed, answering questions calmly and observing everything around her. She noticed how the humans interacted with one another, how they communicated not just with words but with gestures, tone, and expressions. There was a rawness to them, a vitality that intrigued her. One evening, after a particularly grueling session with a group of scientists eager to study her biology, Aelira ventured outside the embassy compound. She wandered through the crowded streets, taking in the sights and sounds of a culture so foreign yet oddly familiar. Children laughed as they chased each other between stalls selling colorful wares, vendors shouted offers to passers-by, and musicians played lively tunes on street corners. For the first time in years, she felt alive. As she walked, she stumbled upon a small training ground tucked away in an alley. Inside, men and women sparred with wooden staffs, their movements fluid and precise. Intrigued, Aelira lingered at the edge of the courtyard, watching intently. One fighter caught her eye, a wiry young woman who moved with remarkable agility, dodging attacks and countering with swift strikes. Something stirred within Aelira as she observed, a spark of recognition. She had always been told she lacked skill, that she was unworthy of wielding power. Yet here, among these humans, she saw strength born not of innate ability but of practice, resilience, and sheer will. Without thinking, she approached the instructor overseeing the session. "May I join?" she asked, surprising even herself with her boldness. The instructor raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You want to train?" "Yes," Aelira replied firmly. I need to learn. He chuckled, shaking his head. Suit yourself. Grab a staff. For weeks, Aelira dedicated herself to the art of combat, practicing tirelessly under the watchful eye of the instructor. At first, she struggled. Her form was awkward, her timing off, but she refused to give up. Each bruise, each stumble fueled her resolve. Slowly, she began to improve. Her movements became sharper, her reflexes quicker. And as her body grew stronger, so did her spirit. For the first time in her life, she felt capable, empowered. News of her progress eventually reached Captain Darnell, who paid her a visit one afternoon. He found her in the training yard, sweat-soaked and breathing heavily after a sparring match. She straightened when she saw him, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "What are you doing here?" Darnell asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. "Training," she replied simply. He crossed his arms, studying her carefully. "Why?" "Because I have to," she said, meeting his gaze. "I won't be useless anymore." Something flickered in Darnell's eyes, perhaps respect, perhaps suspicion. Either way, he said nothing further, choosing instead to observe her as she resumed her practice. Over time, their interactions grew less formal, less guarded. Though he remained wary of her true intentions, he couldn't deny the transformation taking place before his very eyes. As months passed, Aelira continued to immerse herself in the ways of Terra Prime. She learned their language fluently, adapted to their customs, and earned the trust of those around her. No longer content to remain a mere symbol of alliance, she sought to carve out her own identity. Little did anyone realize, including herself, that this journey of self-discovery would soon lead her down a path neither she nor her father could have anticipated. Aelira's transformation was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to those around her. It began with small victories. The first time she successfully disarmed an opponent during training, the first time she navigated the labyrinthine streets of Terra Prime without getting lost, the first time she spoke confidently in front of a room full of skeptical officials. Each triumph, no matter how minor, chipped away at the walls of doubt that had encased her for so long. Slowly, she started to believe in herself, not because someone told her she should, but because she could feel her own strength growing with every challenge she faced. Yet, as her confidence blossomed, so too did her awareness of the world beyond the confines of the embassy. Terra Prime was not the utopia it initially appeared to be. Beneath its gleaming surface lay cracks of inequality, political unrest, and simmering resentment toward alien overlords like her father. Rumors of rebellion spread quietly through the city, whispered in shadowy corners and hidden meeting places. Aelira listened intently whenever she overheard fragments of these conversations, piecing together a picture of a society on the brink of upheaval. One evening, while exploring a marketplace on the outskirts of the city, Aelira encountered a group of protesters rallying against King Zoratha's rule. Their voices rang out angrily, accusing him of exploiting their resources and suppressing their autonomy. Most citizens hurried past, avoiding eye contact, but Aelira stopped, drawn to their passion. One young man, noticing her interest, approached her cautiously. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his tone wary but curious. "No," Aelira admitted. "I'm visiting." The man smirked bitterly. "Visiting, huh? Must be nice to have the luxury of choice. Some of us don't get that option." His words struck a chord deep within her. She had spent her entire life feeling powerless, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. And now, here she stood among people fighting for freedom. Freedom she hadn't even realized she craved until this moment. Without fully understanding why, she found herself asking, "How can I help?" The man blinked, surprised. "Help? You're kidding, right? You're one of them." "I'm not," she insisted, surprising even herself with the conviction in her voice. "I'm nobody. Just, let me help." Though skeptical, the man introduced her to others in the resistance movement. They were hesitant to trust her at first, understandably wary of someone connected to the very regime they opposed. But Aelira proved herself through actions rather than words. She used her knowledge of alien technology to disable surveillance systems, smuggled supplies to safe houses, and even risked capture to deliver critical information. With each mission, her bond with the rebels grew stronger, and so did her sense of purpose. Captain Darnell, meanwhile, remained oblivious to her double life. To him, Elira was still the dutiful diplomat, fulfilling her role as a bridge between their worlds. He admired her adaptability and growing competence, though he often wondered about the intensity in her gaze when she spoke of forging a better future. There was something fierce beneath her calm exterior, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Their relationship evolved unexpectedly during this period. Once marked by mutual distrust, it shifted toward a cautious camaraderie. Elira respected Darnell's dedication to his people, even if his methods sometimes clashed with her ideals. For his part, Darnell found himself impressed by her unwavering determination, though he couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that she harbored secrets. Still, their shared goal of securing Terra Prime's independence created a fragile alliance, one built on necessity rather than trust. As tensions escalated across the planet, Elira faced a dilemma. Her loyalty to the rebels pulled her in one direction, while her duty to uphold the fragile peace between Terra Prime and her father's empire tugged her in another. She wrestled with guilt, torn between two worlds that demanded everything from her. Yet, amidst the chaos, she discovered clarity. For the first time, she understood what it meant to fight for something greater than herself, to stand up for justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her resolve hardened with each passing day. She trained harder, strategized longer, and pushed herself beyond limits she once thought impossible. The girl who had arrived on Terra Prime as a discarded pawn was becoming something else entirely, a warrior forged in the fires of adversity. And though she knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, she embraced it willingly. After all, she had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. The night before the uprising, Elira sat alone in her quarters, staring at the weapon resting on the table before her. It was sleek and compact, designed for precision, a stark contrast to the clumsy tools she'd practiced with during her early days of training. The weight of it felt unfamiliar in her hands, yet somehow right. This was no longer about proving herself or escaping the shadow of her father's disdain. This was about survival, for herself, for the rebels, and for the millions of humans who deserved a chance to shape their own destiny. Her thoughts drifted to Captain Darnell. He had been absent for several days, dispatched to negotiate yet another treaty with representatives from her father's empire. Part of her wished he were here, not because she needed his protection, but because she wanted him to see the person she had become. Would he understand? Or would he condemn her for betraying the fragile peace he had worked so hard to maintain? She shook her head, pushing the uncertainty aside. There was no time for doubts now. Tomorrow, the resistance would strike. At dawn, the city buzzed with an eerie calm, as though holding its breath. The rebels moved swiftly, executing their plan with precision honed over months of preparation. Elira joined a small team tasked with infiltrating the central communications hub, where they aimed to broadcast a message calling for unity and defiance against King Zoratha's tyranny. The facility was heavily guarded, but Elira's knowledge of alien security protocols proved invaluable. She disabled alarms, rerouted surveillance feeds, and guided her companions through treacherous corridors undetected. Inside the control room, chaos erupted as the rebels engaged the guards stationed there. Elira fought alongside them, her movements fluid and deliberate. Years of training culminated in this moment, every strike calculated, every step purposeful. When the last guard fell, she turned her attention to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. The transmission began, her voice steady and commanding as she urged the people of Terra Prime to rise up. "We are not slaves to fear," she declared, her words echoing across the planet. "We are free. Today, we reclaim our future." The impact was immediate. Across the city, citizens poured into the streets, shouting slogans and tearing down symbols of oppression. The resistance gained momentum, bolstered by the courage of ordinary people inspired to take a stand. For the first time, Elira felt truly alive, not as a princess, not as a diplomat, but as a leader. But victory came at a cost. As the rebellion surged, King Zoratha's forces retaliated with brutal efficiency. Ships descended from the sky, unleashing waves of destruction. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and screams filled the air. Amidst the carnage, Elira found herself face to face with Commander Kale, her father's most trusted advisor. His expression was grim as he leveled a weapon at her. "You've disappointed him once again," Kale sneered. "Did you think you could defy him and live?" Elira tightened her grip on her own weapon, her heart pounding. "I'm done living in his shadow." Before either could act, a blast rocked the area, sending debris cascading around them. In the confusion, Aelira managed to escape, but not without injury. Blood trickled down her temple as she staggered through the smoke-filled streets, searching for survivors. The battle was far from over, and she knew the hardest choices lay ahead. By nightfall, the city was a war zone. Exhausted but resolute, Aelira gathered what remained of the rebel forces in a makeshift command center. Around her, faces bore the marks of fatigue and grief, yet determination burned in their eyes. They looked to her for guidance, trusting her to lead them through the storm. "We can't stop now," she said, her voice firm despite the ache in her chest. "If we falter, everything we've fought for will be lost." As plans were made and roles assigned, Aelira allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought of her father, of the empire he had built on domination and fear. She thought of Captain Darnell, whose return was uncertain. And she thought of the countless lives depending on her strength, her resolve. Whatever happened next, she vowed to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in the possibility of a better world. The war reached its crescendo weeks later, the skies above Terra Prime ablaze with streaks of fire and plasma. Alien warships clashed with human fighters in a deadly ballet of destruction. On the ground, battles raged in the streets, alleys, and ruins of what had once been a thriving city. Aelira stood at the forefront of the chaos, her figure illuminated by flashes of light as she directed rebel forces with precision and grit. Every decision carried weight, every order sealed fates. She had become more than a warrior. She was a beacon of hope for those who dared to resist. Her leadership style was unconventional, blending strategy with empathy. She listened to her comrades, valued their input, and inspired them with her unwavering resolve. Unlike her father, who ruled through fear and intimidation, Aelira commanded with trust and respect. Her presence on the battlefield galvanized the resistance, turning scattered groups of fighters into a cohesive force capable of challenging even the mightiest of foes. Yet, for all her newfound strength, the toll of the conflict weighed heavily on her. Sleep eluded her, haunted by visions of fallen friends and the faces of innocents caught in the crossfire. One fateful evening, as the rebels regrouped in a crumbling warehouse, word arrived that King Zoreth himself was en route to Terra Prime. The news rippled through the ranks, sparking both dread and defiance. Aelira felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger at her father's arrogance, sorrow at the devastation he wrought, and an undeniable flicker of fear. She had defied him, transformed herself into someone he could no longer control, but facing him directly was a prospect she had never imagined. Would he see her as a threat? An enemy? Or worse, still as the useless daughter he had abandoned? When the alien fleet descended, the air vibrated with tension. Aelira emerged from the shadows of the battlefield, her armor battered but her spirit unbroken. Before her stood King Zoreth, flanked by his elite guard. His golden eyes locked onto hers, narrowing in recognition. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the distant rumble of explosions. "So," Zoreth began, his voice cold and cutting, "you've returned. I see you've chosen rebellion over obedience." Aelira squared her shoulders, refusing to cower. "I chose freedom," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Something you never understood." Zoreth's lips curled into a sneer. "Freedom is an illusion. You were given a purpose, and you rejected it. Look at the ruin you've caused." "The ruin you caused," Aelira shot back, stepping closer. "Your greed, your cruelty, it's what drove these people to fight back. I'm not the one who failed here, Father. You are." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Zoreth's expression darkened, his hand twitching toward the weapon at his side. But before he could act, Captain Darnell appeared, leading a contingent of human soldiers. His arrival shifted the balance, creating a tense standoff between the two sides. Darnell's eyes darted between Aelira and Zoreth, clearly struggling to process the scene unfolding before him. "Aelira," Darnell said cautiously, his tone layered with questions. "What is this?" "It's the truth," she answered, her gaze unwavering. "Everything we've fought for, all of it, is because of him." Darnell hesitated, glancing at Zoreth, then back at Aelira. The weight of betrayal carved lines into his face, but beneath the hurt, there was understanding. Slowly, he nodded, aligning himself with the rebels. Then we finish this together. The ensuing confrontation was cataclysmic. Energy blasts tore through the air, reducing buildings to rubble. Aelira fought alongside Darnell, their movements synchronized as they pushed deeper into the heart of the conflict. Zoreth unleashed his full might, his power dwarfing anything Aelira had ever faced. Yet, she held her ground, drawing strength from the people fighting beside her. Each blow she struck was fueled by years of pain, rejection, and resilience. As the battle wore on, Zoreth's confidence began to waver. For the first time, he saw Aelira not as a failure, but as a formidable adversary. Her transformation stunned him, forcing him to confront the consequences of his neglect. But pride rooted him in place, unwilling to yield. The clash reached its peak when Aelira confronted him directly, her weapon clashing against his in a shower of sparks. "You underestimated me," she growled, pressing forward. "You thought I was worthless. But I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm something stronger." Zoreth snarled, his strikes growing desperate. "You'll never defeat me. I am your king. And I am your reckoning," Aelira countered, her voice ringing with conviction. The duel spiraled into chaos, the outcome uncertain. Around them, the tide of the war shifted, the rebels gaining ground as Zoreth's forces faltered. Yet, amid the turmoil, Aelira realized that defeating her father wouldn't end the cycle of oppression. True victory lay not in destruction, but in breaking the chains of fear and hatred that bound their worlds. With that realization, she made a choice, one that would alter the course of history. As the dust settled, Aelira stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving with exertion. Zoreth knelt before her, defeated but defiant, his once unshakable authority shattered. Around them, the remnants of his fleet retreated, abandoning the battlefield to the victorious rebels. Cheers erupted from the human fighters, their voices rising in celebration of a hard-won triumph. Yet, Aelira felt no joy, only the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Victory had come at a terrible cost, and the scars of war would linger for generations. King Zoreth's gaze burned into hers, seething with fury and disbelief. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You may have one today, but you'll never erase what you are. You'll always be my daughter." Aelira took a step closer, her expression resolute. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not your daughter anymore. That part of me died the day you gave me away. What stands before you now is someone who refuses to live under your shadow." Her words struck a nerve, and for the first time, Zoreth's mask of invincibility cracked. Pain flickered in his eyes, though whether it was regret or pride wounded, she couldn't tell. "You don't understand power," he growled. "Someday you'll see, you can't rule without it." "I don't want to rule," Aelira replied, her voice softening slightly. "I want to build, to heal, to create a world where no one has to live in fear of you, or anyone else." Zoreth stared at her, his jaw tightening. For a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out again, but instead, he rose unsteadily to his feet. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the remnants of his retreating forces, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the battle itself. Aelira watched him go, her heart aching with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost, too much damage inflicted. As she surveyed the devastated landscape, she realized that the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding Terra, forging alliances, and ensuring that the cycle of tyranny didn't repeat itself would require every ounce of strength and wisdom she possessed. Captain Darnell approached her, his face lined with exhaustion but also admiration. "You did it," he said quietly. "Against all odds, you did it." Aelira shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Not alone. None of us could have done this alone." Darnell placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Together, they walked through the ruins, assessing the damage and planning the next steps. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but Aelira knew she wasn't walking it alone. The bond she had formed with the rebels, with Darnell, and with the people of Terra gave her hope. Hope that, despite everything, a brighter future was possible. Yet, as the sun rose over the battered horizon, casting light on the devastation below, Elira couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was far from over. Her father's departure marked the end of one chapter, but countless challenges lay ahead. Questions loomed large. How would she unite a fractured planet? Could she prevent the seeds of resentment from taking root again? And most importantly, could she truly step out of her father's shadow and forge her own path? For now, she focused on the present, helping tend to the wounded and comforting those who had lost loved ones. Each small act of kindness reminded her why she had fought so fiercely. But deep down, she knew that the battles to come would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The warrior she had become was ready to face them. But the woman beneath the armor still bore wounds that time alone could heal. The days that followed the battle were a blur of chaos and determination. Elira threw herself into the work of rebuilding Terra Prime, channeling her grief and exhaustion into action. She walked among the survivors, listening to their stories, tending to their wounds, and offering whatever comfort she could. Her presence became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, resilience could light the way forward. Captain Darnell stood by her side throughout it all. At first, his support was cautious, tinged with lingering doubts about her ties to Zoratha's empire. But as he witnessed her unwavering dedication to the people of Terra Prime, his skepticism gave way to admiration. He saw not just a warrior, but a leader who led with compassion and vision. Together, they formed a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Elira and Darnell found themselves atop a hill overlooking the city. The scars of war were still visible, crumbled buildings, charred landscapes, but signs of renewal were beginning to emerge. Volunteers worked tirelessly to clear debris, while children played amid the ruins, laughter echoing through the streets once filled with screams. "You've done more than anyone thought possible," Darnell said, breaking the silence. His voice carried both pride and awe. "They look at you and see a future worth fighting for." Elira smiled faintly, though her eyes remained heavy with the weight of responsibility. "It's not over yet," she replied. "Rebuilding takes time. Healing takes longer. And trust." She paused, glancing toward the distant palace where she had briefly lived during her arrival on Terra Prime. "Trust is the hardest thing to earn." Darnell nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "You've already earned mine," he said softly. "And theirs." He gestured toward the bustling city below. "They believe in you, Elira. That's something your father never understood. You don't rule people, you stand with them." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of peace. It wasn't perfection, it couldn't be, not after everything they'd endured, but it was progress. And progress, she realized, was enough. Months passed, and slowly, Terra Prime began to heal. New structures rose from the ashes, built not just of stone and steel, but of unity and determination. Elira established councils composed of representatives from every corner of the planet, ensuring that all voices were heard in shaping their collective future. She introduced reforms aimed at fostering equality and justice, dismantling the systems of oppression that had long plagued their society. Word of her leadership spread beyond Terra Prime, reaching other planets under Zoratha's dominion. Inspired by her example, whispers of rebellion began to stir across the galaxy. Though Elira knew she couldn't lead every fight, she offered guidance and resources to those seeking freedom, planting seeds of change that would grow in time. As for King Zorath, he retreated to the farthest reaches of his empire, licking his wounds and plotting his next move. But his power had been shaken, his invincibility shattered. For the first time in centuries, fear no longer defined his reign. Rumors circulated that dissent brewed even within his own ranks, as those who had once bowed to him began to question whether his rule was truly worth their loyalty. Elira refused to dwell on him. Instead, she focused on creating a world where such tyranny could never take root again. She envisioned a galaxy united not by force, but by shared values of freedom, compassion, and cooperation. It was an ambitious dream, one that might take lifetimes to achieve, but it was a dream worth striving for. Years later, on the anniversary of the uprising, Terra Prime held its first festival of unity. Streets were adorned with colorful banners, Music filled the air, and people danced together under the stars. Elira stood at the center of it all, watching as humanity celebrated its resilience and newfound hope. Captain Darnell approached her, holding out a hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Elira laughed, taking his hand without hesitation. As they moved together, surrounded by joy and laughter, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. This was her home now, not the glittering palace of her childhood, but this vibrant, imperfect, beautiful world she had helped create. In that moment, she realized she had finally found what she had always been searching for: belonging. Not because of her lineage or her abilities, but because she had chosen to stand with others, to fight for something greater than herself. And in doing so, she had become whole. The night stretched on, filled with light and laughter. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks lit up the sky, their brilliance mirrored in Elira's eyes. The road ahead would still hold challenges, but she faced them with courage and faith. For the first time in her life, she looked to the future not with fear, but with hope. And so, amidst the celebration, Elira knew, no matter what lay ahead, she would face it, not as the useless daughter of a tyrant, but as a warrior, a leader, and a beacon of hope for all who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. The story ended not with finality, but with promise.